good way to think about the gospel of Jesus Christ and who Jesus is and the difference that Jesus makes. A good way to think about faith in Christ might be like this. What if we don't reap what we sow? What if we don't reap what we sow? It's a very easy and often used idea, isn't it? You reap what you sow. What goes around comes around. If you put in a lot of effort or work, you'll get a lot out. These are the kind of ways that we think and that we function in our lives. What if that's not the whole truth? What if that isn't justice? And in the whole truth and the ultimate story, we don't reap what we sow. We easily think about justice as each of us reaping what we sow, but then we notice in the everyday world and throughout our lives that that isn't happening. We see a lot of injustice. We don't see we reap what we sow. Some of the amazing and world-changing truth of Jesus and of the Christian story is in that. Let's open our minds, crack open our thinking to absorb the idea that perhaps we don't reap what we sow. And the reading today is from Mark's Gospel, Mark chapter 11, verses 15 to 19. Mark 11, 15 to 19. And this is an account you might have heard before when Jesus enters the temple and he abruptly lets people know that they ought not to be doing what they are doing. He changes the ways that people are behaving. He flips over the tables and disrupts the furniture in order to stop people behaving the way they are and to make a profound and unmissable point. This profound and unmissable point is made in each of the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. This account is there in all of them. And it's the world-changing idea that perhaps in Jesus Christ we don't reap what we sow. So let's look at the story here in Mark chapter 11 and verses 15 to 19. They came to Jerusalem, and he entered the temple and began to drive out those who were selling and those who were buying in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves. And he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. He was teaching and saying, "Is it not written, 'My house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations'? But you have made it a den of robbers." And when the chief priests and the scribes heard it, they kept looking for a way to kill him, for they were afraid of him, because the whole crowd was spellbound by his teaching. So notice that those who were affronted or confronted by what Jesus was doing, the chief priests and the scribes, those with authority in the religion and in the temple, they sought a way to kill him, to stop him talking and acting and to put him down. Why? The text here in Mark doesn't say because they knew he was wrong or because they had a different idea. They sought a way to kill him, for they were afraid of him. And why afraid? Because the whole crowd was spellbound by his teaching. His disciples, when evening came, Jesus and his disciples went out of the city. So this was an amazing spectacle. The people involved were spellbound and people were afraid, shaken up. What shall we do? Jesus makes a great point here. And what is his point for the people that day and for us today and perhaps for sinking into and altering our lives and our experience of life? Well, Jesus was making a great change, turning things over, flipping over the way that things are. The people buying and selling, working perhaps, acting in the temple that day, they were doing things that they were used to doing. And although there's always corruption or selfishness going on around the edges, largely they were doing things that they thought they were supposed to be doing. Things which were according to the rules and according to the usual tradition. The buying and selling of animals for sacrifices, to make sacrifices in the temples. And along certain guidelines about what currency should be used for the buying and selling of these animals. So there had to be some exchange of currency. So the correct currency was being used for buying and selling of animals for sacrifice. So weren't they just getting on with their everyday business as best they could, according to the rules, as best they knew how, under the authority of the chief priests and the scribes? And here comes Jesus coming in and disrupting them, as if to say what they're doing is wrong, when they thought largely and mostly, as best they could, that it was right. So what is Jesus' profound point that he makes in Jerusalem on his way to the cross, the Palm Sunday march, from the cheering of the crowds to the crucifixion at Easter? In a sense, Jesus is telling a story or drawing a picture, but rather than only telling a story as he often did, or simply drawing a picture, he acts out his parable. He does the story. He does a demonstration of the story. And then we start to understand, hear and receive more easily what the story is, what his point is, his demonstration. Everything is changing. Everything is changing. Religion is changing. The temple, the use of the temple and the nature of the temple is changing. Now this gets our attention. What change? How is it changing? And when this account is told in John's Gospel, there's some helpful explanation. Jesus refers to the temple and he says, when people question what he's doing and look for the point, he says, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." So perhaps we can see, when we consider Easter and what we know of the story of the cross, the link here between what Jesus has done in the temple and what he is about to do at this point in his life and death, what he is about to do at the cross. People ask about the temple. What are you doing? Why are you changing everything that we're used to doing in the temple? What is this difference that you're making? And Jesus says, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." A lot of his listeners were still very tunnel visioned. They assumed in a very concrete way, absolutely, that Jesus was talking about this temple, the building that they were at, and that Jesus was talking literally about bringing it down and building it again in 3 days. And they cried out and said, "That's impossible. You couldn't rebuild this temple in 3 days. And what do you mean about bashing it down anyway?" But hang on. Listen more deeply. Listen more carefully. Listen through the perspective of the cross. Jesus is making a link between himself and the temple. And when he says to be torn down and then built up again in 3 days, think about Good Friday to Easter Sunday. He's saying, I am the temple. He's saying the place of God, the way to God. The focus, he's saying, is me. I am the temple. And not only for Jesus to say, I am the temple, but the thing I am going on to at Easter, at the cross, the crucifixion and the resurrection. This is the temple, as it were. This is the place to go for your worship. This, he's saying, faith in me, faith in Jesus, is the house of prayer, is the place to go to be contemplative, to be found by God and to find God. Now that's surprising, because what if we don't reap what we sow? What had been happening is that if you come to the right place at the right time with the right people and stand in the place you're permitted to, buying animals for sacrifice, using the correct currency which you exchange at the correct place, all of these certain ways to walk and be, this is the way to come into some union and some acceptance with God. And here's Jesus saying, God was never confined to that building or to those rules or to your abilities. The availability of God is to everybody, which is why in his teaching that Jesus makes alongside this demonstration, he says, is it not written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations? Now that was very important, for all nations, meaning you need not have the correct currency or the correct animals or stand in the place you're permitted to, or make sure that you're very good at keeping to all of these regulations in order to enter the house of prayer. What do you need in order to enter the house of prayer? And in his stark demonstration and his announcement about the temple here, Jesus is saying, all you need is me. All you need is Jesus. All you need is the thing that Jesus is doing at Easter. Therefore, faith in that act and that sacrifice and resurrection. Therefore, all that you need is not what you sow. All that each of us needs to reap and to have and to be at joy and peace and full life is not what we sow, but what Jesus sows. What if we don't reap what we sow? We reap what Jesus sows. And even more, that he will reap what we sow, what I sow, that he will take account of my sins and falling down and my best efforts, which are not enough to be accepted in the temple, as it were, at the seat of God and in the embrace of God. But Jesus Christ is enough and gives himself to us for that purpose. Thank God that each of us may reap not only what we sow, but what Jesus Christ sows in the Easter story. And this is surprising and it's challenging, and it reminds us that not everything is in our own control, which is exactly what Jesus was illustrating in his surprising walk into the temple and his demonstration there, that not everything is in our control. So may we trust God with open hands and open hearts, and let the authority be his, and in that way reap peace and fulfillment in our lives.